This story is about my elder sister, Dove, who has made my life incredibly difficult for as long as I can remember. It all started when I was younger, and my sister just couldn't stand my existence. Apparently, I was leading a life I didn't deserve, and she made sure to remind me of that at every turn. Dove's life hasn't exactly gone as planned, and it's mainly her own doing. She's currently divorced and living with my parents, as she's jobless and without a college degree. She dropped out of college for her wealthy boyfriend, who eventually left her when she showed her true colors. Growing up, our relationship was far from ideal. Dove was the pretty and smart one, and she knew it. She constantly flaunted her beauty and intelligence, which made me feel small and insignificant. My parents always praised her and sided with her, leaving me to feel like I was never good enough. People would rave about how stunning and talented she was while I was just me. It stung, and it hurt deeply. What made it worse was the way she used this attention to manipulate me, often telling me that nobody liked me. Those comments, especially during my formative years, left me feeling incredibly insecure and inadequate. Despite the way she treated me, my parents never took my side. Dove always seemed to meet their expectations, and I was left to fend for myself emotionally. As a child and teenager, she often had friends over at our house, and when my parents were at work, they would snoop around in my room. There was one time when her friends messed up a project of mine, and it almost caused me to fail. I wanted to tell my mom, but Dove threatened me. She blackmailed me with embarrassing pictures of me from when I was younger, threatening to send them to my classmates. I was terrified, and as a 14-year-old, I didn't know what to do. Dove never took responsibility for her actions, and telling my parents seemed pointless since they didn't seem to care much about my feelings. As the years went on, she did more things to sabotage my peace of mind. There was a particularly hurtful incident when she used my phone to send inappropriate pictures of mine to my group of friends. Then, she spilled coffee on my prom dress and cried, playing the victim by claiming it was an accident. At that point, I stopped confiding in anyone in my family. It seemed like everything I did was either ignored or dismissed. Over time, I began to realize that Dove's behavior was rooted in something deeper. She was a narcissist, and her hatred towards me wasn't personal. It was about her own insecurities. Her relationships never fared any better. Dove was a red flag in every relationship she had, and she cheated on every boyfriend she dated. It was painful to watch, especially knowing that her ex, who was still a friend of mine, confirmed that Dove was a gold digger who only cared about money. As she got older, her behavior only worsened. I had worked hard to get into my dream college and eventually landed my dream job. It was a huge accomplishment for me, and it felt good to finally be doing something for myself. Along the way, I met Atlas, the love of my life. Atlas was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: kind, intelligent, and incredibly supportive. We hit it off immediately and started dating shortly after meeting. We took numerous vacations and trips together, and with every new adventure, our bond grew stronger. Atlas was close with his family, and after just a few months of dating, he introduced me to his brothers and parents. But I hesitated to introduce him to my family, mainly because of Dove and her malicious tendencies. I knew that introducing Atlas to my family, especially Dove, would be a risk. She couldn't handle the fact that my life was going better than hers, and I was certain she would try to sabotage anything good in my life, especially my relationship. Eventually, after a year and a half of dating, I had no choice but to tell my dad about Atlas. He was supportive and happy that I had found someone worthy of me. He even invited us over for dinner, and while I was excited, I was also anxious because I knew how toxic Dove could be. Before the dinner, I talked to Atlas about the situation with my family, particularly Dove. I warned him about her and how she might try to create problems. He assured me that he could handle it. However, I was still on edge. A few days later, I received an unexpected call from Dove. It caught me off guard since she had never called me before. She was asking about Atlas and when I would be visiting home. She seemed unusually interested in him, and I couldn't help but feel like she was up to something. I had no doubt that she had heard about my relationship and was trying to get information from me. By now, I was seriously considering whether or not I should introduce Atlas to Dove at all. I knew her intentions were not pure, and I was starting to think of alternatives to meeting my parents at their house. Maybe it would be safer to bring them over to my place, away from Dove's influence. Let me tell you a bit more details about Dove. She used to be academically successful, but once she entered college, her focus shifted entirely to her looks. She met a wealthy guy, Jeremy, and dropped out of college to be with him. While I was studying for my entrance exams, she constantly belittled me, saying I would never get into my dream school. Well, I did get in, and for the first time in my life, I received validation from my parents. They were proud of me, and I felt good about my accomplishments. However, Dove was jealous. At my celebration party, she announced her engagement to Jeremy, stealing the spotlight on my special day. Dove would constantly flaunt her expensive gifts and remind me that I would never find a rich man like her. She body shamed me, called me ugly, and told me that nobody would ever want to date someone like me. It was cruel and I was devastated, but I learned to rise above it. After her engagement, Dove's relationship with Jeremy continued for a while, but it eventually ended in divorce. Jeremy revealed to me the truth about their marriage. Dove had no interest in having children and wasn't emotionally connected to him at all. She had been using him for his money, and after their divorce, she moved back in with our parents. Now, after years of struggling in her personal life, Dove continued to live off my parents. She didn't have a job, a degree, or any real ambitions. She put on an act of being traumatized by her divorce, but in reality, she was enjoying the freedom to party and hook up with random men. It was hard to watch. When I landed my dream job, my parents were proud and I couldn't have been happier. But Dove's jealousy was evident. She started to make cruel comments, and after one particularly upsetting incident, I finally confronted her. I laughed at her and told her that I didn't want to be like her. This enraged her, and she retaliated by damaging my clothes. My dad saw through her actions, but my mom continued to cover for her. Despite everything, I was still determined to introduce Atlas to my family. I discussed it with him and decided that I needed to show him how Dove would behave. When we arrived at my parents' house for dinner, it didn't take long for Dove to start her usual manipulative behavior. She threw herself at Atlas, trying to get his attention and make me jealous. She even went as far as to change her appearance, dyeing her hair and wearing an outfit to match the situation. It was embarrassing to watch. After dinner, Dove continued her attempts to gain Atlas's sympathy, sharing her sob story about her divorce. But Atlas was smart enough to see through her tactics. Still, I couldn't help but feel anxious. I didn't trust my sister, and I knew she was planning to make more moves. I was bracing myself for more drama to come. A few months ago, Atlas proposed to me during a special trip. And yes, he went down on one knee with a beautiful ring, and I was overwhelmed with happiness. It was everything I'd dreamed of, and the joy I felt was indescribable. But things weren't all perfect. After visiting my parents, Dove began her familiar tactics of trying to manipulate Atlas again. She sent him a message asking how he was doing, which seemed innocent enough at first. But knowing her history, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was up to something. Dove knew that Atlas was a huge cat lover, so she started sending him videos of cute cats, even though she didn't care about cats herself. It seemed like a subtle way for her to get closer to him. Then, after hearing about his fondness for them, she got a cat of her own and began recording videos with it, sending them to Atlas. At first, Atlas would show me the messages and videos she sent him, and we both laughed about it. But after a while, he stopped mentioning her at all, and I thought maybe she had finally given up on him and moved on. Life was busy for us, with work and planning our future, and Dove was no longer on our minds. That was until I saw something unsettling one day. I was scrolling through social media when I saw that Dove had added Atlas on his account. She was liking and commenting on every post, even the old ones from years ago with those silly heart emojis. It left me with a strange feeling. Without a word, I checked his phone. I found that Dove was still texting him regularly, though the messages were left unread. I was uneasy when I saw missed calls from her. One in particular came at 3 a.m. I couldn't ignore the suspicion building inside me, so I confronted Atlas about why he hadn't told me about her recent attempts to contact him. He looked nervous and explained that he had been ignoring her and hadn't thought it was necessary to tell me about the texts. When I asked about the late-night call, he finally confessed that Dove had called him one night when she was upset. She had talked about some traumatic events related to her divorce and needed someone to talk to. Atlas had told her that it wasn't appropriate to call at that hour and suggested she speak to her parents instead. He also told her she should reach out to me if it was really urgent. Although his explanation seemed reasonable, the fact that he had kept this information from me made me feel uneasy. I told him that hiding things like this could hurt our trust, and I needed to know everything, no matter how insignificant it seemed. He assured me that he had no intention of falling for her tricks and that I didn't need to worry. But the doubt lingered. I had read countless stories of men falling for similar schemes, despite their best efforts to resist, and I wasn't about to blindly trust him. I told him that if Dove called again, he needed to put me on the phone so I could hear for myself. The very next night, her call came through, waking me from a deep sleep. I answered, and when she heard my voice, she immediately hung up, claiming it was a mistake. The next day, I texted Dove from Atlas's phone, telling her that she should never contact him at odd hours again, and that if anything was truly urgent, she needed to contact me directly. For a while, she stopped texting him, and I felt a sense of relief, thinking that maybe she was finally out of our lives. That peace didn't last long, though. After Atlas proposed to me, I sent a picture of the engagement ring to my dad. It didn't take long before Dove was back at it, trying to worm her way into Atlas's life again. She sent him more videos and tried to engage him in conversation. That was the last straw for me. As soon as Atlas told me, I called Dove and let her have it. I told her to stop with her manipulative tactics and get a life. For the most part, she stayed silent while I vented my anger. But little did I know, this wasn't the end. After I hung up, I received a call from my mom. She was furious, accusing me of being cruel to my sister. According to her, Dove had been so distressed by my accusations that it had given her panic attacks. My mom told me that I needed to be more considerate of Dove's feelings as she had been struggling with depression after her traumatic divorce. But I knew better. Dove had never shown any signs of depression, and her behavior was nothing short of manipulative. I told my mom that if she continued to defend Dove's actions, I would have no choice but to cut her off from my life. I had been the one to endure Dove's cruelty for far too long, and I wasn't about to be her victim anymore. But what happened next left me in shock. I never expected Dove to go so far as to try to seduce my fiancé. All the bullying and emotional torment she'd put me through were one thing, but this was a whole new level. As we planned our wedding, I found myself in the midst of an unexpected confrontation with my mom. She apologized for shouting at me, admitting that she had acted out of fear for Dove's well-being. However, one of my cousins informed me that Dove had been spreading lies about me, claiming that I was accusing her of trying to steal Atlas away from me. She had been telling everyone that I didn't deserve my life or my fiancé because she was the gorgeous one and should have everything I had. When I told my mom about this, she went silent, finally understanding the extent of Dove's manipulations. She told me to forget everything and focus on the wedding, which I tried to do. Dove kept a low profile, at least for a while, and I thought we had finally seen the last of her. But then, on the day of our wedding, everything changed. I was getting ready for the ceremony when Atlas's best friend called, asking me to come to Atlas's room with my parents. He sounded urgent, so I rushed over, worried something was wrong. When we arrived, we found Atlas lying shirtless and groggy, clearly in distress. His groomsmen told us what had happened. Dove had brought Atlas a drink, which he initially refused, but she insisted. After taking a sip, he realized it had been spiked, and he immediately excused himself to go to the washroom. He called his friend, explaining the situation, and when his friend arrived, Atlas was already partially unconscious. The groomsmen had switched on the camera when he entered the room, capturing the horrifying scene. Dove was sitting on top of Atlas, undressing herself and trying to seduce him while he was barely conscious. She tried to cover up when she saw the camera, but it was too late. Everything had been recorded. When we entered the room, Dove was already on her way out, but her smug attitude didn't go unnoticed. She even tried to claim that what happened was mutual and that Atlas had been making advances on her. Mom slapped Dove, telling her that we knew exactly what she had tried to do. We showed her the recording and she was stunned. My parents immediately kicked her out of the venue and security was instructed to prevent her from re-entering. Dove had tried to ruin my wedding by making sure everyone knew she was involved with Atlas, hoping it would cause me to cancel the whole thing. My dad called a doctor who confirmed that Atlas had been drugged. It was a tense, emotional time. Atlas's family was furious, and my parents had to apologize to them for the scandal. The wedding was delayed until Atlas had recovered, and it seemed like the drama would never end. But in the end, we went through with it. My dad walked me down the aisle, and I couldn't be happier to marry Atlas, despite everything that had happened. After our honeymoon, my parents visited us, apologizing once again for Dove's actions. My dad told us that Dove would be out of our lives for good and that she had been kicked out of the house. Though I was relieved, I still couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. If it hadn't been for Atlas's friend recording what had happened, I might have believed Dove's lies and everything could have fallen apart. I'm still processing the emotional toll it took, but I'm grateful for the strength I found to stand up for myself in my relationship. Atlas and I are stronger than ever, and we're moving forward, leaving the toxicity of Dove's influence behind us.